If you do not have a massive, absolute, furious reaction, for 2 years, they told you you had to wear masks inside of the Capitol Hill, Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate. Just in time for the State of the Union, they suddenly totally do away with the mask mandate. I mean, I am talking about Joe Biden walking right out, shaking hands with everybody. Yesterday, Joe Biden wore a mask when he walked across the grounds at the White House, that big black mask that covers half his face. Then today, he walked right into the floor of the House of Representatives, no mask, virtually no one had masks on. And not only was he not wearing a mask, he was shaking hands with everybody all down the aisle. Right from that moment, if you didn't think to yourself, my God, this entire administration is full of complete shit, and I apologize for cursing, but I have to, then you do not have a functional brain. They have tried to argue that they are the party of science, and in the space of one day, suddenly not only were masks no longer required, but you could walk down the aisle as a nearly 80-year-old man and shake hands with everybody as you walk down the aisle. Not just not wearing masks, but shaking hands. All right? Biden started off, by the way, anybody else notice his super squinty eyes? As if he couldn't even open his eyes. You could barely see his eyes. Very weird. It was as if he were addressing while staring into the surface of the sun. He said, freedom will always triumph over tyranny as his open. And he talked about Ukraine and Russia, the battle that is going on there. What he didn't say was anything particularly helpful or newsworthy. He said that we were going to stop flights from Russia, potentially go after some of the oligarchs for their ill-gotten gains. But what he didn't say was anything about the major issue that is underway here, which is we are paying hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars a week to the Russians for oil, because part of the Green New Deal is limiting the amount of oil and gas we create in the United States. So we are taking money that would otherwise be in the United States and that we would be able to take out of the pocket of Russia. And in the name of climate change and the Green New Deal, we have limited the amount of oil and gas production we can do, and we have instead given that money to Russia. And this is my big issue with all of the sanctions that are being put in place. How in the world do we sanction? How in the world do we sanction the world as it pertains to Russia while simultaneously giving Russia billions of dollars in oil money all the time? It's nonsensical. We are cutting our own legs out from under us when it comes to the sanctions. Of course, he didn't address that at all, okay? He continues to spread the lie that he has created what he said was 6.5 million new jobs. I want to be clear about this. There has been no creation of 6.5 million new jobs. What has actually taken place is some of the people who had to give up their jobs back in March of 2020, when we made the disastrous decision to shut down our economy to no benefit, we still have not regained all those jobs. The percentage of men and women who are working today is lower than it was in March of 2020, in February of 2020. So when you say we've created 6.5 million new jobs, no. Most people who have gotten jobs have just gone back to work after not working forever. Let me just say this. I try not to be difficult about misspeaking words, but Joe Biden is reading his entire 62-minute speech off of a teleprompter, and he mixed up the word Iranian and Ukrainian. He said effectively that we will never break the will of the Iranian people, that Vladimir Putin will never, and I'm paraphrasing, break the will of the Iranian people. No, it's the Ukrainian people. That's a pretty big whiff. He's reading directly off the teleprompter, and he's not able to tell the difference between the country that we support, Ukraine, and the country that is our biggest foe right now in the entirety of the Middle East, Iran. It took him 30 minutes to get to inflation at all. And then he said his plan to solve inflation was to lower costs, but not lower wages. Well, that sounds great in theory, by the way. I love that idea. I love to lower the cost of everything. It's not actually in practice how reality works. And you also don't get to lower costs while not lowering wages. Remember, the reality here is we got 7.5% inflation, the highest since all the way back in the early 1980s. It's been 40 years since we've had inflation like this, okay? Build Back Better is not going to make inflation better. It's going to make inflation worse. And I give Joe Manchin some credit for this because he's accurately pointed out that spending trillions of dollars more by the government, pouring even more money onto the funeral pyre of American expense from the government is not going to make things better. Pouring gasoline on top of a raging fire doesn't make it burn slower, all right? And so none of this makes sense. He also spent a long time talking about Build Back Better, but the reality is Build Back Better was already shot down by his own party in the Senate. So it's already been rejected. Everything that he's arguing for doesn't make sense there. He said there's going to be a pandemic fraud investigation. I hope it's true. And I hope the first person that gets investigated for pandemic fraud is Dr. Fauci himself, who you will notice virtually has disappeared. You can't find Dr. Fauci anywhere in the media now. He's in witness protection program all of a sudden as they're eliminating all the COVID restrictions. Biden tried to say we're in a new moment for COVID and that we're now experiencing progress, which I guess means the winter of death is not here, and that we're no longer going to be blaming everyone who is unvaccinated and saying there's a pandemic of the vaccinated. Remember, we're still in the winter of death. Winter's not over yet. He says we don't need to let COVID control our lives, but we'll never accept living with it, which I don't even understand what that means. He said that soon kids under the age of 5 are going to be able to get vaxxed. Makes no sense because we know now the Pfizer vaccine doesn't actually work for kids ages 5 to 11 in terms of preventing them from getting the vax. He also continues to say we're going to have more free tests. Who the world needs a free test now? And that we're going to combat variants. I don't have a lot of faith in that. He said it's time to get back to work in offices. I agree. And that our kids need to be in schools. Well, they needed to be in schools over the past 2 years. He also said, quote, I've bought more pills than anyone in the world has. Is he sure? Because Hunter Biden's bought a lot of pills based on everything that I've seen. He finally said that he wants to fund the police, not to defund the police. Well, that's ironic because Democrats spent the last 2 years arguing that they needed to defund the police. So now Joe Biden is attempting to say that he wants to fund the police. So he's rejecting one of the cardinal arguments of the past couple of years. Now that's fair because I've said defund the police is the single dumbest argument maybe in modern American political history. So that's fine. But in order to flip the script there, you have to acknowledge that all the Democrats who screamed defund the police in the wake of George Floyd were wrong because the murder rate skyrocketed.